See you. I want you to know that as I go through my day, I carry around a little notebook so that I can put my thoughts down for my lessons and for my opportunities to speak. And by the end of the day, I lose it. So if somewhere around you find a notebook with about 2 pages taken up with some really bad handwriting, please let me know, because they're probably next to my keys, which I lose all the time. Pardon my cough drop, but I can't seem to shake this cough. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. I one time had the opportunity to hear that song we just sang, sung by more than 8,000 women whose passion and whose hobby is to sing. And they sang that song so loud and with such passion. And where we were was in the Georgia Dome. They shook the whole stadium. Will always be one of my favorite memories. And when I hear that song, think of that moment and how beautiful it was. And actually at that moment, surrounded by some really cool friends too. So everybody open your Bibles. We're going to be doing this kind of the old-fashioned way. We're going to look at the text and thinking about some of the things that Jesus did and Jesus said in his life. And think about what the lessons are for us. And we're going to be looking at John chapter 9. So go ahead and open your Bible. We're going to spend pretty much our whole time right here. So if you would, I'd like for you to read along with me. John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. And as he, of course, this was Jesus, and as he passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? And Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he said this, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and applied the clay to his eyes. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors, and those who had previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? And others were saying, this is he. And others still were saying, no, but he is like him. And he kept saying, I am the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. They said to him, where is he? And he said, I do not know. In the midst of the book of John, this chapter stands out for a number of reasons. One is if you happen to have a red letter Bible, not as popular as they once were, but if you do have that, you'll notice that almost the entire body of this chapter is in black ink. It's not Jesus teaching. It's chapter 8 is, and chapter 10 is. But here, almost this whole chapter is not Jesus speaking, but instead the reaction and the events around this beggar, this blind man. Makes it unusual. It's unusual because dealing with the, if you would, the superstition of the disciples. And as he turns that superstition from saying, did this man sin, or as an infant or before he was born, somehow did he sin, which is something of the thought process maybe of this time? Or did his parents sin, that he was born blind, because that's the way that happens? And he says, it's absolutely the opposite. There's going to be eyes opened because of a blind man. And he gets to be the vehicle that 2,000 years later we can talk about the process by which we can believe. What a blessing. But let's go back. Because there is some things about this story that are hard to kind of process if you have not kind of been there. Think about that day. All the anticipation and all the excitement and all of the joy about a child on the way. How wonderful that is. The excitement and discussions of what he will be like, or will it be a she, and all those beautiful things. And then the baby is born, except they may not have been willing to immediately show the baby to the mother. Maybe they were huddled off to the side, the women that had aided with the delivery, and huddled off to the side and trying to decide which one of us is going to tell mom that the baby has no eyes. And all the possibilities, all of the anticipation comes down, well, what will he do? And there's really only one option. He will beg. And the boy learning to walk and bumping into things in the neighborhood, and maybe some of those around about that took care of him, and watching out, make sure he didn't get into too much trouble and fall someplace dangerous. As he grew up, learning the neighborhood, not by sight the way most kids do, but instead by sound and by feel. Yep, that's the blind boy. He grows up, still a fixture in his neighborhood and still around those that have known him his whole life, and yet he goes and finds a place and becomes a fixture in that location and begins the only vocation he really can, which is asking for the mercy and the kindness of others, begging. Until this one day that they see him, but he's not walking along the wall, finding for the corners and the landmarks that he has learned by feel. Instead, he's walking down the street in the middle, and he's getting out of the way of people, and he's looking around, and you can imagine he must have had a sore neck by the end of that day because he's looking everywhere. Look at... And they say, is that him? Looks like him, but could it be? No, can't be. He's blind, and he's going, it's me! It's me! Can you imagine how that rippled through the neighborhood? It's me. And they said, how can you see? He said, I met this man, Jesus. He put clay on my eyes, told me to go to the Siloam and wash, and I could see. Where is he? I don't know. What did he know? Having gone to Siloam blind, having come out seeing. A couple of things about this. One of the strangest parts of this story, and I said there's a lot of very unique things about this chapter, People want to know why Jesus did what he did. Why spit, make the clay, put it on his eyes? Did it somehow impact or aid in the healing process? Not at all. The one who can feed 5,000 from his hands, the one who could calm the storm, a little bit of spit and sand is not going to matter much. But what it did do, and the point of this chapter, it separated Jesus and the blind man, so that the blind man did not know where Jesus was. And everything that comes after this in the chapter revolves around the fact that this blind man, with just what he had experienced, is going to face down the religious leaders. Pick up the reading in verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. When the Pharisees also were asking him again about how he received his sight, he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, I washed, and I see. This answer gets even shorter later on. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. Often wondered if echoing in the background of this story is the voice of Joseph of Arimathea and of Nicodemus, saying, do you see what happened? No. He has to be a sinner. He's not one of us. He's not keeping the Sabbath day traditions. Do you see? Now use that word specifically. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, he is a prophet. Some commentators said maybe this was placed as a question. A prophet? I don't know. Was he a prophet? The Jews did not believe him that had been blind and received sight until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight and questioned them, saying, is this your son? You can hear this inquisition. Is this your son who you say was born blind, and how does he now see? They put them on the spot. The parents answered and said to them, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, do not know. Ask him. He is of age, he will speak for himself. The parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, the parents said, he is of age, ask him. He is of age, talk to him. But I have this image. I don't know how elderly this mother was, but I have this image of him touching her son's face and having him look into her face for the first time. And understanding that swirling around this moment is the word Jesus. Ask him, he'll tell you. So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. And he answered and said, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. So they said to him, how did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? What did he do to you? And then you can get some idea. I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you not want to become his disciple too, do you? They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from. The man said to them, well, here is an amazing thing. That you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears them. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opens the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And he answered him, you were born entirely in sin, and you are teaching us, and threw him out. All that whole exchange, Jesus is not present. But a blind beggar facing down the religious leaders. And what does he tell them? Do I know how? No. But I know who. And I know that the only way that could be done is from God. But there is a block in the way. In the same way that the disciples were wondering, who sinned, this man, even before he was born, or his parents? Jesus says, your superstitions could not be more wrong. The Pharisees blocked by their own, if you would, superstition. The superstition of the Sabbath day. The superstitions they had created and the traditions they had created around that simple idea of do no work on the Sabbath day, and they had created an entire religious system around this one thought. And they had in their mind the idea of what God's people should be like, and could not shake that idea, even confronted with a blind man that now could see. Could not get over it. And he said, it's an amazing thing. An amazing thing. But that's not the end of the story. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had put him out. And finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, let me tell you something interesting. If you've never had the experience, ever worked with or known someone who is blind. Janelle and I went to school with a young man in college. By the way, that young man is no longer young, obviously. But I'll tell you what he does. He is the play-by-play commentator, or the color commentator, for the Spanish language channel for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, the baseball team. He does color commentary for Major League Baseball, and he's blind. Haven't seen him in years. But I did run into him about 10 years after we graduated or something like this, and I said one word to him, and he went, Richard, how you been? He had me. You know how they can say, they can remember the sounds, the voice. That is their way of functioning in this world, that they know those sounds and know those people in the same way that we would memorize a face. But he had been separated by Jesus because he'd sent him away to the pool. Excuse me. But now this voice, the voice that he will remember that said, go wash. I don't know what Jesus sounded like. Tell me you haven't thought of that. Come on, guys. Go wash. Except when he hears that voice again, he sees lips and a face and eyes. And if you can read this passage and not smile, I don't know where your heart is. Because as he confronts him and says, do you believe in the Son of Man? And his answer is, and you tell me who. You just point him out, and I'll believe. Just point him out. And Jesus said to him, I want you to look at the irony in this word. You have both seen him. And he is the one who is talking to you, talking with you. Some commentators believe that the next verse is the most superfluous verse in the book of John. As he says, and he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. So let's draw kind of the circle closed here. An encounter with a blind beggar means that Jesus has made a disciple and alienated the entire religious leadership of the nation. Many people believe the book of John is the book of belief, even though that's right, because he says these things were written so that you may believe. But the truth is, there is a whole lot of unbelief. 5,000 people were willing to make Jesus king in chapter 6. By the end of the chapter, no one is there. And the disciples are maybe huddled off to the side to see if they want to break and run at the time. As he says, would you two go away? And here we have a beggar, and lost the religious leadership. What does that mean? The simple answer is Jesus wants the beggar because he can see. And has rejected those that are spiritually blind. Blind because of their traditions, blind because of their superstitions, blind because of their political ambitions, blind because of their focus on wealth and fame and status and all the things that corrupt up people's lives. And I'm going to tell you that that very list can apply to us today. But Jesus is quite thrilled, joyous for one blind beggar. The ironic thing is that a few weeks ago, Jeff put a picture up on the PowerPoint of the Pool of Siloam. Everybody remember that? Remember that? The Pool of Siloam was created because Hezekiah dug a tunnel between the Gihon spring, which was just outside of Jerusalem, into the city, and the water pools. It goes downhill and pool there inside the city to create a secure water source when the city was under attack. While Hezekiah dug that tunnel, at the time there was a prophet by the name of Isaiah. He was working with and interacting with Hezekiah. And Isaiah wrote that you'll know when the Redeemer, the Messiah, the King, you'll know when he comes. You know what he'll do? He'll open the eyes of the blind. Even in the Psalms, it mentions that the one looked for would open the eyes of the blind. And yet, these religious leaders, the ones who taught Isaiah and taught the coming of the Redeemer and taught all that, is being confronted with one who once had no eyes and now says, Well, here's an interesting thing that you don't get it. That I was blind, but now I see. So who do we want to be? A blind beggar who understands the concept, Lord, I believe, are those that for their own agenda have rejected him. If you ever feel alone, if you ever feel isolated, if you ever feel where I'm not sure this is appreciated, does God care about me? I want you to know about a blind beggar who was accepted and loved, even at the cost of the rejection of the political machine. Tell me, who are you? If there's some way that we can serve your need to become a child of God, or you've been struggling spiritually, understand. Even a beggar, a blind beggar, accepted by Jesus. I don't know where you've been, what you've done, what you've struggled with. Let him open your eyes. And if you think that's too much, I want you to think about this. You have his testimony. Are you willing to listen? We often make fun of the Pharisees and go, well, they sure were a bunch of idiots. They were a bunch of fools. But are you willing to listen to the blind beggar? Lord, I believe. Tell us how we can help you with your walk with God. If you need to respond, why don't you come up front while we stand and sing our invitation song.